however the axe falls in the budget, the government will have to get measures through the Senate. And one on the crossbench is Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm. He's got some strong views on funding for higher education and other issues. Senator, welcome.
Good afternoon.
This report from Deloitte seems to show that universities are overfunded, but to be fair, as we just heard there from Vicky, the sector disputes this. They say that the figures don't stack up. Are they fair game for a cut in this budget?
Yes, they are, absolutely. If you look at the big picture, we have a huge deficit, getting worse, very little prospect of returning the budget to surplus or paying down the debt in the short term. So even if there was some merit in the Group of Eight's argument or the other universities' argument, everybody needs to take a haircut. So, it's everybody's problem that the country is in the financial state it's in. Everybody needs to contribute. But specifically to the universities, we've got vice-chancellors on million-dollar salaries and other academics or other people there, senior managers, on very, very high incomes. This is a similar argument to the chief executive of Australia Post. They don't have any skin in the game. They have none of their own personal wealth at stake. They're running a business that can't really go broke. The government guaranteed.
But I've got to interrupt there. When you're running a huge university, Melbourne University, Sydney University, the ANU, these are world-class universities that actually generate quite a lot of money and don't rely dominantly on government income. In fact, they generate fees from students, from international students. Don't people in those kind of positions deserve good salaries so that they can compete for the biggest, brightest brains to run their universities? Isn't that just, common sense?
Yes, I suppose they deserve a good salary. The question is whether $1 or $1.5 million is too good. My argument would be that if the universities think they deserve more taxpayers' money, and that's what this argument is about, this consideration of the budget situation is about, are they entitled to maintain such substantial salaries and also hold their hand out to the taxpayers? And of course, those taxpayers don't earn anything like, not even remotely like, the kind of salaries that the people asking for the money are talking about.
The government is considering lowering the income threshold. It's being reported. We'll know very soon what Simon Birmingham really wants to do when he actually says it out loud. But for people, when they start repaying their student loans, currently this is at $55,000. If it's lower, how much lower should it be? Because, we're also in this prism where these young people are finding it hard to afford homes, pretty difficult position. Wages growth, we know, is stalled. It can't get any harder for some of these people, can it?
Well, bear in mind that they've borrowed other people's money, other Australians' money, in order to go to university and gain a tertiary qualification. So they're in debt to their fellow Australians. At what stage should they start repaying that debt? I would think without imposing undue hardship on them, and so I'm talking about a graduated approach. I would think anything above the minimum wage would be about where I'd start. I don't think it's at all unreasonable to say to people, well, if you're in the workforce, you're paying tax, you're above the minimum wage, you can start to contribute some money back into the system that allowed you to get where you are.
Sounds to me like you're a fan of the reforms, even though they haven't been fully, obviously, released. The government has your vote?
This is not a new discussion. When Christopher Pyne was the Minister for Education, he sought to amend the contribution made by students to their own education. Currently, students via the HECS system pay for 40% of their university costs, and the remainder is funded by taxpayers. And he sought to make that 50-50, and there was an awful scream over it, and everyone was talking about $100,000 degrees as if the 10% difference was that dramatic. It never was, but this ground has been well tilled, And my feeling is education is a virtue. We should encourage it. We should encourage people to get post-school education. The question is who should pay for it, and what should we expect in exchange for that money?
Well, there's enormous benefit to our culture, our economy, as a result of people obtaining these higher degrees. Are you really suggesting that public funding should be dramatically less than it is?
No, but what I am suggesting is that tertiary education pays off in terms of higher salaries. Those who have tertiary qualifications almost inevitably earn higher salaries throughout their lives than those who don't. So the question then becomes, to what extent should that benefit be socialised? To what extent should other people pay for that? I think it's perfectly legitimate for that benefit to be paid for by the beneficiary to a reasonably significant extent, admittedly via a fairly generous loan system, which we have in the case of HECS. Nobody is prevented from going to university because of lack of funds. They can go to university if they're poor as a church mouse. They get a loan to go there, but then later in life, when they benefit from that education, they should be returning at least a proportion of that money.
I've got to ask, did you pay for your degree, David Leyonhjelm?
Some of it, no. I didn't even get the choice. I've got 3 degrees, and I'm very critical of the fact that the first degree I was poor as a church mouse, and so I benefited from the public funding system. But the second 2 I did part-time. I didn't need a subsidy, and yet it was impossible to avoid.
All right, let's just move on to some other measures. Are you convinced about the good debt versus bad debt argument coming from the Turnbull government?
Well, there is a difference between the theory and the practice, unfortunately, in the case of governments talking about this. In theory, when the government spends or incurs debt in order to build something which will create an asset, which then becomes usable to the public on an ongoing basis, that's supposedly good debt, and there is a case for that. However, I have a sneaky suspicion that the government is about to go and classify a whole lot of stuff that doesn't meet that sort of standard as good debt just to make it look better than it really is. There's an awful lot of debt to go around, and I reckon most of it is bad.
It's a pretty dramatic U-turn, isn't it, from the debt and deficit disaster, the budget emergency, to all of a sudden be reclassifying some debt as good debt?
Yes, they're trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, I think. Ultimately, we should get back to the situation we were when Peter Costello was towards the end of his term as Treasurer. We didn't owe any money. Now, that would be a great situation to be in. Unfortunately, the GFC encouraged the government, it was then the Labor government at the time, to engage in a dramatic increase in spending. And, even when the GFC came to an end, we haven't got out of that habit. It's a bit addictive spending money, and we need to find a way to get off that habit, out of that habit.
Just a final question. There was a suggestion from the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, Kate Jenkins. We're going to discuss that in a moment here on RN Drive. A lot of people are already texting in that the public service should promote targets for women, basically businesses that the public service gives contracts to that should have a 40% kind of target of women that they employ in those businesses. Tony Abbott says it's anti-men. Do you think it's anti-men?
Well, yes, that's one way of looking at it. Yes,
how is it anti-men if a company has 40% women? Wouldn't that mean potentially 60% would still be men? Where's the anti-men bit?
Well, because you could almost guarantee that 40% of the applicants for the jobs won't be women. There's a large number of women.
How do you know that?
Well, I mean, I've been in executive recruiting I was in executive recruiting for almost 20 years. It was almost never did you get as many women applications as men. And there's a very good reason for that. Women are very sensible. A lot of them don't want to work, 60, 70-hour weeks, which is what many of these jobs involve. A lot of women are very, very comfortable working part-time, so inevitably there's certain consequences from that. There's a lot of women also who would much rather not work at all. They like to look after their kids, but they go into the workforce from straight economic necessity. and but they're not enthusiastic about climbing the greasy pole of success.
Many women are enthusiastic about climbing the greasy pole. I've met lots. I might be even one of them. I mean, they're everywhere. Greasy poles, can't get enough of them. I mean, there's really women who are very ambitious. I don't think that's a scientific comment you just made, is it?
No, well, except that I have very substantial experience in recruiting for executive positions, and you're quite right. There are women who are very ambitious, very keen to climb the greasy pole of success. I actually don't think they suffer any disadvantage if they are obviously qualified as men. I don't think they suffer any advantage. In fact, I think there's a bias in favour of them already, because a lot of workforces are conscious of the fact there are not very many women there, and there's quite a strong feeling that if you have an overwhelmingly male workforce, it gets a bit blokey, and having a few women or even a lot of women around it creates a better working culture. That's probably the word I'm looking for. Better work environment for everybody.
Interesting thoughts there. David Leyonhjelm, thanks for joining me tonight.
My pleasure.
That's the Liberal Democrat Senator for New South Wales, David Leyonhjelm. He'll have a crucial vote on the Senate crossbench when, of course, all of these reforms come before the Senate, and he's been quite clear on his views on these issues in the past. Does seem to support these cuts to universities. We'll hear more about it very soon when the government makes its case for changing the way that universities are funded and, of course, the implications on students. I have been inundated with texts already on this issue. Lots of concerns about that, lowering the payment threshold if students have to pay back their degrees quicker, the impact on women. I can promise you we will be going through all of the detail, not only on RN Drive, but RN Breakfast and across RN programs after we know more of the detail. We've been able to speculate on some of the announcements today based on some strategic leaking by the government, but we don't know them all. We will find out more. 0418 226 576 is the text line. You can also tweet us using the hashtag RN Drive.